Welcome to Made on Mel. My name is Emily. In this video, I'm going to be showing you how I go about making my husband and my daughter matching outfits. I will be using two garments that they already wear that I know fit them well. Also, I can go ahead and use those as templates. Real quick, I'm almost finished the shirt and I just wanted to provide some clarification that when I started filming these projects, I intended for the father-daughter outfits to be one video. I quickly realized that I needed two, one for the romper and one for my husband's shirt. So if you haven't seen the video for my daughter's romper, go ahead and check that out. But if some of my commentary isn't lining up, that's the reason why. I found this flat sheet at a thrift store. I showed my husband and he's totally down to have a shirt made out of that. So I'm gonna go ahead and make matching father and daughter outfits for their Father's Day gift. All right, let's get started. So my first fabric cut will be the back panel here. So I actually found on the back here, along the back of the shirt, there's a seam that runs. So I thought if I just fold the shirt over at the seam, then I can see at the back this really straight line, and then I can make sure it's at a right angle with the stripes that are on this fabric, and then I can make sure that that center point is also lining up with those same stripes. So I have pinned half of the shirt down for the back panel. I don't need to pin this side of it because what I'm gonna do is trace out half of it here, and then I will flip it over on the other side and trace that after I cut it. And so the reason I do that is to make sure that the back, like each panel that I cut that has symmetry, is symmetrical. Let's start tracing. For some parts of it, you are going to be able to use a ruler and then just line that up. But there is a very, very slight curve to this seam, so I'm not going to be able to do that. I simply just take my measuring tape and line it up at the 1/2 inch line, and then I make a small mark with my tailor's chalk. So you can go ahead and trace your garment this way using whatever seam allowance you want to use. Okay, I'm at a corner now and I'll show you how to do that. So you'll want to find the edge of your corner, the point here. Now we need to do the seam allowance, right? So we're gonna measure from the very edge here and make a mark at 1/2 inch, and then we will do the same thing at the very edge of this one, marking out 1/2 inch. Then we will bring those up and connect those two spots. I'm ready to trace the top back. Because this is a straight cut here, I'm actually going to use a quilting ruler and just line up at 1/2 inch here and just trace a line there. Okay, I'm ready to cut. I have my half cut. Now I've marked my center point here, or where I want my center point to be is this, so we know that is how you can, fold this over along that point. Okay, I'm happy with that placement, so I'm going to go ahead and cut out the other half here. I'm getting ready to cut out the front panel here, and as you'll notice, there is a button placket here. I notice this is a separate piece that's sewn on, so I'm not including it in the fabric cut for the front panel. So rather than pinning and tracing this one, we'll make sure we have the exact same size as the cut we make here. Okay, so I have cut out the one of the front panels here, and now I'm flipping it over so it's a mirror image. Okay, so I'm really happy with how I've match the colors in the pattern here. So I will go ahead and cut that out. Now quickly, I want to talk about the button placket here. So I am going to do it as a separate piece. I will make sure to pattern match when I cut out the plackets. About, we'll say 1 inch. We're going to go with 1 inch. And then I'm going to add 1/2 inch of seam allowance for both sides. So we'll need to cut out 2 inch wide. No, but this is folded over. So I need 2 inches plus 2 1/2 inches. So I need 3 inch wide. So I have one of my front panels here lined up on the pattern. This is my front center line here. We will then attach a button placket onto this where we would want the pattern to line up. We know we want the button placket to start on this pink line here. So I need to add 1/2 inch to this to cut that. So we'll be 1/2 inch into the white, and that's where my cut line will be, because once we take away the 1/2 inch seam allowance there, then that will be the stitch line and where we see the button placket. Now I'll need to measure, we said 3 inches in total. So I'm gonna account for that 1/2 inch because that was accounted for in our seam allowance. So then the 3 inches is landing here. Okay, here are my 2 button plackets. They are identical pieces, and I'm gonna put out the panels now and show you why they make sense. Okay, so here are my 2 front panels. This pink here is approximately 1/2 inch, so I'm gonna make sure that my seam runs along there. So we will not see the pink on the front of the panels here. So if I fold this under 1/2 inch, like this, because that'll be our seam allowance, and then I fold this side in 1/2 inch, and then I fold it in half, you'll see the pink here, and that will be sewn down like this so that the pattern kind of continues, and then the light pink is here. So that's how I figured out my 2 button plackets. I did use my cutting mat and quilter's ruler as well as a rotary blade to cut those out so they were perfectly straight. Now I'm going to move on. Rest of the shirt here, cut out this back panel here that sits above the back panel and connects to the shoulders and the sleeves. When I'm cutting and tracing this piece out, obviously I will cut and trace half, flip it over, and then do the rest so it is symmetrical. And then when I do the sleeves, I will cut out one sleeve fully and then go ahead and make a mirror image for the other side. Okay, I'm gonna cut all those out and then meet you back. Ready to start sewing the shirt together. I did some prep on some pieces, so these are the button plackets. I have applied interfacing and then ironed these down. As you can see on the shirt here, there's like the upper back panel, then there's the piece that sits under the collar, and then there's the collar. Now, because on the inside these are all lined, I cut 2 pieces of all of those. So for those 2 collar pieces, I applied interfacing to only one of them just to make it a little bit stiffer, but I thought if I applied interfacing to both, it would be too stiff. So I've pinned the top collar piece to the bottom collar piece. Now, as you can see, I have pattern matched, so when the collar is up, it will sit like this. You can see that the pattern will line up. Now, for the inside piece, what happens is, because this will sit like this on the inside of the shirt, right? And then when you flip your collar down, then the patterns will still line up. So I'm gonna go ahead and sew these 2 pieces together. I went ahead and did some notches along the curve here just so it can sit a little more flatly when I press it open. Now I cut the notches first and then I trimmed away some of the seam allowance. And the reason I did that rather than cutting the notches after is so that I had a little bit more fabric to play with. If I had cut the seam allowance away first and then did the notches, it'd be more likely that I could accidentally cut into my stitching line here. I want to show you how I press them. This side here will be sewn on the inside of the garment, so the collar will be folded over this way. So what I did first was press the seam allowance towards the neck piece here. Then I went ahead and folded the top over here and pressed this because this is how it's going to sit when the garment is in use. I wanted to make sure that was nice and pressed down. Now for the one that sits on the back, so remember this is going to be showing to the back of the garment. So again, I went ahead and pressed the seam allowance down towards the neck piece, but then I went ahead and flipped the collar over like this because that is how it's going to be sitting when the garment is worn. So when put together, it's going to kind of sit like this. Now what I think I'm going to do is run a top stitching line here. It's actually an under stitching line because I want to capture the seam allowance here in that stitching line so that the seam allowance stays pushed down. Now I did start and stop the under stitching line here where the collar meets the neck piece because we have this piece of the neck piece that hasn't been sewn down yet. So I didn't want to sew down the seam allowance here since I accounted for it when I cut out my fabric pieces. Now this upper back piece, we can go ahead and attach the neck piece to that first. I'm gonna go ahead and pin and sew that in place. As well, I have the inside lining piece here, so I will pin and sew the inside piece to that as well, and then press it open, clip my seams as we have been doing. That seam allowance has been pressed downwards like this here. Now I will run a top stitching line here, catching that seam allowance. I will attach the upper back piece to the lower back panel here along this edge, and I have actually pressed the seam upwards on the shirt, and the reason for that is when I go to add the inside panel here, I'm going to fold over the bottom of the inside panel so that it covers this raw edge here. Now with right sides together, we will pin these two panels together. So I'm gonna go ahead and pin all of the edges here. So starting down here, up here, across here, I'm gonna unfold these folded seams here and try to sew those together, going up along the collar, around the top, and back to the other side. So I started pressing this after I folded it inside out, and I thought something just doesn't look right here. This is the shoulder seam here, which would sit like that. So yes, there is a lining piece on this garment, but I need to sew the front panel onto the back panel before I can close in the inside lining there. Then I noticed that this neck panel that extends past the back panel, it is also attached to the front panel. So I need to seam pick up here and here. I may pick it back to the collar though, just so I can get the front panel in here without like having this seam in the way. I'm also going to need to pick this as well. And okay, I have seam ripped this open. I'm going to go ahead and flip this over, right sides together, and then I can pin this in place. Then once that is sewn down, then I will pivot my work and sew that seam. So let's go ahead and do the sleeves. So what you'll do is, because the back portion of the sleeve opening here is larger than the front portion, it doesn't make sense to find the centerpiece of our sleeve piece. So I'm simply going to put them right sides together and pin them in place like we have been doing. So just matching those edges like this, pinning and moving the piece, and once it's pinned, I will go ahead and sew it around. It's a new day and I had my husband try on the shirt last night after I sewed the sleeves in, and then I kind of pinned it closed. And what we realized is the shoulder seam was sitting too far down his arm. So I have gone ahead and pinned where I need to take in the sleeve here. So I'm gonna go ahead and trace around where the new sleeve should sit, and then I'm gonna seam rip and cut my fabric and then grade it out. And then I'm gonna do the same on the other side with the other sleeve. The sleeves have been attached and pressed as well as top stitched here. So now it's time to move on to the button placket. It does attach to the neck piece here, so I want to make sure I leave that open without the liner attached so I can attach the placket and then nicely enclose everything once I do the liner here. Here are those button plackets and they're ready to go on. So these are already pressed, so I just need to open them up and feed that raw edge of the shirt edge in there. I think I'm gonna pull this seam back here and open that up so that the button placket can sit a little bit past the top of the shirt here, like so, and then I can enclose it when I do the lining. This is the bottom placket here where it's meeting the bottom of the shirt. Now I'm not going to sew all the way to the bottom here for two reasons. We have a raw edge here and a raw edge here. So I'm likely going to stop my stitching around here. Then when we go to hem the shirt, I am going to fold it up. It does need to be a little bit shorter for my husband, so that works out. And then I will fold the button placket in and sew that shut. I'm gonna sew this down and stop around that point. And then I'm gonna repeat the exact same process for the other side. So where the button placket meets the top of the shirt here, I trimmed it so it matched the edge of the shirt here. That way when I go to sew on the neckband, all those seams line up nicely. We have our lining piece here, and if you remember, I had sewn it all together, then I had to take it apart, but it's still attached to the collar here. What I'm thinking is I can kind of fold the front panel in and the sleeves in. Then I can flip the lining around so that I'm lining up the neck edge here. That was a little bit difficult, but it's all sewn down here and I flipped it right side out so that button placket is nicely tucked away here, and now it's fully lined here. And then this is where the front meets the back, and then this will eventually connect at the where the back meets the arm. But remember, we trimmed that up, so this is still a little bit longer, so I'm going to leave that loose now. There are a few spots where it feels like the fabric's being pulled a little bit, so I might go back and pick some seams. Now I will be running a top stitching line over this whole thing, so even if I pick a few seams, the fabric will all be secured with the top stitching. So I have sewn down that lining piece. So this is what it's looking like on the inside. It's certainly not perfect. On the outside, it does look pretty good there. So I'm not too worried about how it is on the inside, and it really shouldn't affect the fit, I don't think. So now I think what I'm going to do is close in the side seam and the underarm seam. Once I'm done that, I can hem the bottom, and then I can take care of that, finishing the button placket at the bottom. Once that's done, I'll need to cuff the sleeves and then add buttonholes and buttons to the shirt. I also want to run a top stitching line right here on the outside of the button placket. Now it sounds like we're almost done, and we are. Just a few more steps. So I'm gonna see how far I get the rest of this afternoon, and then I may be able to finish it this evening. So I will insert a few clips of doing those steps. I'm getting ready to do the buttonholes and sew the buttons on. I found 8 of these in my stash, so I think they will work out. This is how those buttonholes are looking so far. I'm fairly happy with them and how they're turning out. So I am going to go ahead and finish sewing the buttonholes. Then I will line up my other button placket with these, and then make sure the position of my buttons line up. I also need to sew the cuffs. I did press them last night, but I need to sew those cuffs on the sleeves. Otherwise, this is almost done. Thank you so much for watching this video. I hope you found it inspirational, or you learned a few tips and tricks along the way. If you haven't watched part 1 where I make my daughter a romper, please go ahead and check that video out. I will link it below. If you want to see my husband wearing the shirt, please go to my Instagram. It's @MadeOnMill.